The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Speaker, I appreciate the chance to come back to my question to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change from a few weeks ago on Baie du Nord. Let me start by sharing the reality of where we are. If we want at least a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees Celsius, what scientists have shared is what is required for just a chance at a livable future. And if Canada were to do its fair share of what we know remains of the global carbon budget, 86% of Canada's proven fossil fuel reserves need to remain unextracted. Now fast forward to April 4th. The most recent climate report came out, and scientists made clear, they said it's now or never if we want to limit warming to 1.5. It was called an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership. The chair said half measures are no longer an option. The UN Secretary General, and when describing the report, these are his words. He said, climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals, but the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels. Investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, he said, is moral and economic madness. Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, he said, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic. Now, just a few days later, this government had its first big climate credibility test, whether to approve Baie du Nord, a deep water oil drilling project 500 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador, 1,200 meters below the surface, that we expect has up to 1 billion barrels of oil. Combusting that oil is equivalent to 100 coal-fired power plants for a year, and production wouldn't even start until 2028. I was told by the minister in our previous conversation that there's this net zero condition. It'll be net zero by 2050. Well, what good is that if you've already burned all the oil by then? The added trick that's often not mentioned is that it's expected much of this oil would be exported. And of course, when we do that, this is a global carbon budget. It may not show up in our domestic target, which even on its own is not sufficient to do our fair share, but has the added illusion of not affecting our emissions, when in fact it's directly contributing to the global climate crisis that we're in. Now, no one is saying, myself included, that we need to shut down oil and gas industry tomorrow and turn off the taps. But what we do need is an immediate investment in the economy of the future, an investment in workers. In Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, we know that they have some of the highest wind energy potential in North America. And so why aren't we investing in those workers today? Why aren't we investing in their future and their retraining? Because we know that this new fossil fuel infrastructure that's been proposed, this is what's been described as moral and economic madness. And so let me remind the parliamentary secretary in closing, Canadians expect more. Last fall, a full 66% of Canadians polled shared they expect more ambitious climate action. And so my question tonight is, why is this government continuing to approve projects like Baie du Nord, knowing full well the majority of Canadians expect so much better? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague and friend from Kitchener Centre for his eloquence and his passion and commitment for the environment, which I share. And Mr. Speaker, I would highlight to him, over the past 6 years, the Government of Canada has invested over $100 billion and introduced over 100 measures in support of climate-related commitments. And since 2016, the Government of Canada has been working with provinces, territories, Indigenous peoples, industry, and civil society to implement the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. This plan outlines over 50 concrete measures to reduce carbon pollution, help us adapt and become more resilient to the impacts of a changing climate, spur clean technology solutions, and create good jobs that contribute to a stronger economy. In addition, Madam Speaker, the Government of Canada has made significant progress to implement the Strengthened Climate Plan, A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy, which was released in December 2020. The plan builds on the Pan-Canadian framework and includes a suite of new measures to reduce emissions, supported by an investment of $15 billion. In June 2021, the Government of Canada adopted legislation to enshrine its commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 into law. The Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act provides a durable framework of accountability and transparency to deliver on this commitment by establishing a transparent process to plan, assess, and adjust the Government of Canada's efforts to achieve our national targets based on the best scientific information available. On March 29th, 2022, Madam Speaker, the Government of Canada introduced the 2030 Emissions Reduction Plan, Clean Air, Strong Economy. This is the first emissions reduction plan released under the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, supported by, Madam Speaker, $9.1 billion in new investments, and the plan reflects the economy-wide and sector-by-sector measures and strategies to reduce emissions while creating jobs for workers and opportunities for businesses. The plan also reflects input from thousands of Canadians' businesses, Indigenous peoples, communities, and governments. These actions will enable Canada to achieve its enhanced, nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement of 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030 and put us on a path to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Madam Speaker, we have made great progress in implementing federal climate actions and will continue to ensure a healthy and prosperous net zero future for all Canadians. Our government recognizes the importance of the oil and gas industry in our energy mix while Canada moves toward a net zero emissions economy by 2050. This is why we are committed to working with industry, provinces, Indigenous partners, and Canadians to define and implement the cap on oil and gas sector emissions. Following consultations, the cap will be designed to lower emissions at a pace and scale needed to achieve net zero by 2050. Further, regulations to cut methane emissions from the oil and gas sector by 40 to 45% by 2025 were completed in December of 2018. And in 2021, Canada also joined the Global Methane Pledge and was the first country to commit to reducing methane emissions in the oil and gas sector by at least 75% below 2012 levels by 2030. I'll finish up.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Well, Madam Speaker, while I do respect the parliamentary secretary, if approving Baie du Nord is what accountability looks like in Canada's climate policy, then we've got a problem. Yes, much of what the parliamentary secretary is true. He didn't mention Baie du Nord in his response. It is true. There is $9.1 billion in the emissions reduction plan, and I'm cheering that on. At the same time, there's $7.1 billion between now and 2030 in a new fossil fuel subsidy, a tax credit for carbon and capture and storage, which again only further locks in going the wrong direction. I'll close. When we talk about Baie du Nord, this is why this talk of a cap on emissions is insufficient. You can cap emissions all you want. If you're not going to look at production, if we're not going to be honest about the reality of the need to leave some reserves in the ground for a livable planet for our children, nothing else really matters more than that. Thank you.
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member again. And Baie du Nord. The federal assessment of the Baie du Nord project was led by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada since 2018 and is subject to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act of 2012. The environmental assessment considered a wide range of impacts, including those to fish and fish habitat, marine mammals, sea turtles, migratory birds, species at risk, environmental special areas, commercial fisheries, direct greenhouse gas emissions, current use of lands and resources for traditional purposes, and the health and socio-economic conditions of Indigenous peoples. And finally, Madam Speaker, in fact, the agency consulted 40 potentially impacted Indigenous groups from Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Quebec. Thank you, Madam Speaker.